Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Give yourselves a big round of applause for being here at 10:30 on a Friday morning. And that's also to send a signal to everybody that we're about to start. So, right, perfect. Everyone is nice and quiet, settled, finding their seats. So you just had your festival welcome where you heard from my colleague Jean-Claude what's going to be happening over the next few days. We have not one but two special things for you right now. So in a few minutes, we're going to have Olive Sr. up on stage in a conversation about the full range of her work and everything she does. But before that, we have a special treat. We are actually going to have a performance by Shakira Burton. Does everyone know that Shakira is the reigning First Citizens National Poetry Champ? Who doesn't know that? Everybody knows, and she's going to be defending her title on Sunday. So you don't even have to go to the Slam finals to hear her perform. You're going to get to see her now in a special performance. She's done a special piece to welcome us here to this year's festival, reflecting on the festival theme, Always Coming Home. So I want you to give Shakira a huge round of applause and get ready to wake up.
Good morning, everyone. No need to panic. I'm right here. Right? So sit back, relax, and listen. I belong here. Feet firmly planted, 10 toes extended. I exist here. Stretching to get comfortable because this is my home, so I ride through the waves like the Bocas, cause Bocas Lit Fest is lit. This is it. Cheers to coming home. And like the prodigal son, we return to exactly where we belong. This was home all along, where creativity meets success and favor meets greatness. My place is here. Can't you hear the echo of my name calling, come home? So when I exist out of this, I get homesick, nauseous, upset. No, Andrews is not the remedy. It's creativity and need to release, to create, to be on a stage, to put pen to the page is like home is where I just create all the best versions of me. Can't you see? This space belongs to me. I have marked my territory, branded my name. When I sign my signature, it will not be the same. You will remember me. You will smell my fragrance on the stage, so the remnants of my pen will inspire them to come home. Why don't you answer the call of your destiny? The future is ringing. Do not press decline. Take your mind off. Do not disturb. Haven't you heard? There is no place like home. I find you should raise your expectation. Challenge the situation. Say, this is for me. My call, my destiny. The history of Bocas Lit is like the legend of the Cascadura fish. No matter where you wander, you will always come home. This stage has a stronghold worse than OBI. You never hear about writers, Tabanka? Creativity withdrawal. Like if I don't write a poem, I don't feel normal. I need that high. The adrenaline that only comes from the thrill of ink and pen. So I am commencing this season of creativity. Calling all writers, calling all poets. Don't forget, you belong to the Bocas Lit Fest. Come home. Come home. Come home. This is your homecoming. See yourself becoming an artist. That is it. Home is where the heart is. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Shakira. Someone shorter than me. That's not easy. So you see, the saying, some things are worth waiting for. So you had to wait a little bit longer to hear Shakira, but that was worth it. And you gave me an idea. I think we didn't do it this year. Next year, we have to make sure that the food vendors in the cafeteria next door have Cascadura on the menu. That way we'll guarantee a full audience every year, right? So everyone, Shakira Burton, please give her another round of applause. And we wish you and all the other Slam competitors the best luck for Sunday night. We're not allowed to have favorites. I'm not allowed to have favorites, but I wish all of you luck. All right, so that was one poet up here on stage. We're about to welcome two more poets up on stage. We are really, really thrilled to have Olive Sr. back at the Bocas Lit Fest this year. I think this is Olive's fourth time, I've lost track. She's one of our favorite authors, and we're always happy to have her back. She's actually going to be launching her latest book, a novel, on Sunday, so you need to come back on Sunday afternoon to hear about that one. But right now, she's going to be in conversation with Amilcar Sanatan, who many of you know. Amilcar is also a poet. He's just published not one, but two poetry chapbooks in the space of about a month, so he's been very busy. And he's going to be, yes, let's give that a round of applause. And he's going to be having a conversation with Olive about the entire length and breadth of her work. And all I can say is I want to get out of the way as quickly as possible so they can get up here and get the conversation started. So let's get them up here. Let's welcome them on stage, and we'll start.
Rasta problems, sorry. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. That's good. Well-fed, very literate public we have today, Olive. And we want to just establish that we are very conscious of the role of memory in literature. And for us, literature is a very public thing. So today we're going to switch it up and flip it up and have a situation where we want you to contribute your memories of the poetry, make connections between your work and what Olive is doing. You could summon your memory of what you would have read when you were in secondary school or in university or sitting down in your private study thinking about the work. So I am a voice of moderation and a conduit for Olive, but this is principally an opportunity for you to have a conversation with her. So you all ready for that? Yes. So have your questions. Be prepared. And that doesn't mean I'm lazy and underprepared, you know. That's a good, sophisticated way to say I read none of Olive's work. And I'm giving you all that burden and responsibility. But I'm not doing that. We want to make this a collective dialogue because we value life and memory. But so I'll do some hot takes and then I will go to you all. So pull up your memory that, you know, your poem that you like and so on. We just have to big up some intelligent, beautiful people here from Providence Catholic Girls' School. So big up Providence with the school sweater. You know, even in the AC, they are Providence girls. We appreciate that, you know. Couldn't get more Catholic than that, you know, Olive. And actually, that is where I want to start. On Colonial Girls' School. This is my book from Form 3, which I would beg Olive to sign. Colonial Girls' School for Marlene Smith McLeish. Borrowed images willed our skins pale, muffled our laughter, lowered our voices, let out our hymns, dekinked our hair, denied our sex in gym tunics and bloomers, harnessed our voices to madrigals and gentile airs, yoked our minds to declensions in Latin and the language of Shakespeare. That's an excerpt of your poem, Colonial Girls' School. And that resonated for decades after 1962 when both Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica received political independence. Could you speak about what drove you to write Colonial Girls' School and also make sense of Caribbean children throughout the region, reading that literature to have that sense of memory and time. Yeah.
Okay. Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And first, I just want to say I'm happy to be home. Thank you. Bocas is home. Trinidad is home. The Caribbean is home. So, and it's such a pleasure to be here as well. And thanks for that introduction. Colonial Girls School. I wrote that because it represented my own experience at a Colonial Girls School. And I described exactly what took place, but also the point of the school. I keep saying I had a good colonial school education, but I became aware afterwards of all that was missing from that education. So I had to educate myself. And I realized afterwards it wasn't just about my school, although people from my school are quite offended to this day. But it's about all the schools, boys and girls, not just in the Caribbean, but throughout the British Empire. Because we all had the same curriculum, which was the British curriculum, and we were told nothing about ourselves. So this is what this poem is about, what was lacking. But what pains me today is when I read this poem in Jamaica, and it's still very popular with contemporary students, and they say to me, but miss, nothing has changed. I find that very painful, and what the curriculum, of course, has changed. But what they're talking about is how education, or formal education, has failed to engage students in terms of creating citizens who are, who feel that they're fully participant in our society. So it's still relevant in that sense.
So there's a paradox at play, where we did work to subvert the curriculum, but in terms of the educational deficiencies we have today persist, and even worse.
Yeah.
We have seen the independent state able to build 180 schools, 200 schools. Jamaica, you still have the shift system, which we phased out in the 2000s in Trinidad and Tobago. With the exception of Barbados, I would say, Caribbean societies are seriously challenged, and acutely, almost 1/3 of students throughout the region fail English A, which is a compulsory subject, and we have serious literacy challenges. So could you speak to that pain that you felt, knowing that you were part of that generation trying to bring relevance and a grounded sense in the curriculum and education, but it seems as if we have kind of missed the mark in terms of improving the outcomes for people's lives?
Well, I think like everything else, it's what is required is transformative change, not just little bits and pieces that are being changed, which is what's happening. That requires visionary leadership throughout the Caribbean. It requires people who understand the kind of changes that are needed, and who have the ability to make these changes happen. And I think the educational, I don't know about Trinidad, but certainly in Jamaica, I think the educational system is really marred in the past. It's very difficult to change, but it needs to change because it's become almost irrelevant to the lives of young people today. You know, I don't understand half of what, what's going on in the heads of young people, what interests them, and so on. So your question is beyond me. I'm not an educator, but I'm a concerned citizen who has been talking about the issues for a long time, and I don't know what the answer is, unless it's
we don't always know the answers.
Transformative.
That's no problem. But I receive your call in terms of what you're asking for us to think more deeply and profoundly about, and the challenge to leadership. And I'm sure that in the Big Ideas Forum in Bocas, some of these issues will be probed by the speakers and development planners.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to school in 2016, 2017. I was invited to do a workshop at I wouldn't brag and say it's the best secondary school in Trinidad and Tobago, Bishop Anthony Trinity College East in Trinity. But that's a school in the East equally superior to any school that would imagine themselves as that. And when I was invited there, they were recreating in performance bird shooting season. I don't know if you would have liked it, but it was exciting. to see young people taking up that poem, which is on their examinations that they were preparing for. Can you read with us? Bird shooting season.
Okay. I can find it. Sorry. I need the mic. Sorry, I'm not very good at this. This is why I prefer to write. You know, and edit what I say. And I also need my glasses. This is terrible. Okay, I need my glasses as well. Sorry about this.
No problem.
And this poem is from my first book. It's one of my earliest poems. And it's about an experience of my childhood where we really had bird shooting season, which is a limited time of the year when people, mostly men, go out and shoot birds. I've never understood the purpose, but anyway, I think that comes out in the poem called Bird Shooting Season. Bird shooting season, the men made marriages with their guns. My father's house turned macho as from far the hunters gather. All night long, contentless women stir their brews. Hot coffee, chocolato, cerasi, wrap pone and tie leaf for tomorrow's sport. Tonight, the men drink white rum neat. In darkness, shouldering their packs, their guns, they leave. We stand quietly on the doorstep, shivering. Little boys, longing to grow up bird hunters too. Little girls whispering, fly birds, fly.
One of the things that your work, you are keenly aware that beliefs, values, they come through these formal institutions of schooling, but also outside of the school. And bird shooting season is another way that we are teaching gender roles and even violence to the environment and life. If you could speak to some of that way that you were contending with the kind of teachings and knowledge that you receive outside of the classroom.
Well, I'm not sure I would put it that way. I wasn't contending with anything because in terms of my work, I just write the thing. I'm in the moment, I'm into the writing of the story, the poem, whatsoever. But because of who I am, my beliefs come out in the poem. But it's not that I'm consciously thinking, I'm going to write Eddie Bauer read that poem and said, oh, you've written a feminist poem. I didn't even know what feminism was at the time. You know what I mean? So I'm saying a lot of what I do is expressing who I am as a person who has been shaped by a lifetime of circumstances. But as a writer, it's not that I'm thinking in any explicit kind of way that I'm writing about women's roles or I'm writing about gender or any of those things. They come out in the writing, and I always say those questions shouldn't be addressed to me as a writer. They should be addressed to the reader. It's what the reader is extracting, from the work.
Most definitely. So that is a nice transition to the idea of the Caribbean writer life. I don't really believe in lifestyle as much. That sounds fancy. It kind of reduces how broke you were for different periods. Lifestyle sounds like a flex, as we say.
A flex.
But there is a life that you all have. And I want to think about that commitments. In your work, we see several commitments, and particularly around indigeneity, First Nations people, Aboriginal people and groups, and the indigenous peoples. You, in your recently published Paradise Once, a novel, you continue by the book all year. Get sang. You'll get $2 off. If you do it in the next 2 minutes. But so in terms of the work that you're doing, that seems to be a commitment in your writing, an accountability you have always had to indigenous peoples in the Caribbean, but throughout the world.
Well, Well, I'm at the stage now where I'm looking back at my writing. As I said, when I'm writing it, it's intuitive, it happens. And I don't have any great thoughts about what I'm doing, but I'm at that stage of life, I suppose, where I am looking back at the body of my work. And what really surprises me is how consistent I have been with the things that interest me, themes, topics, so on. And my interest with the indigenous population, in the case of Jamaica, the Taino, has always been there from my childhood. I've written an author's note in the book, which talks about how I became interested in this, because we were told in our history books, Columbus came, met these primitive little people, and then they vanished. And I, as a child, I could never understand how a people could vanish. And then over time, growing up in the country, I realized, they're all around us. In Jamaica, our favorite food is bami, cassava bami. Yuca was the food of the Taino. Hurricane is a Taino word. The canoe is the first indigenous word in a European language, in a dictionary of a European language. The canoe is a Taino word. And so on and so on. And so as I went on, as a child, even discovering these things in the countryside, I started thinking, who are these people? What happened to them? And finally, many, many, many years later, they spoke to me to write this book, which is from the Taino point of view. So I'm just using that as an example. But one of the things about my childhood is I was very fast in Jamaica. If you're fast as a child, you're asking too many questions. But I think what has shaped my life, and I think shapes the lives of all writers or all creative artists, is curiosity. If you're not curious about the world around you, forget it. You'll never be a creative person, because curiosity is what allows you to engage with society, with the world. And I grew up in rural Jamaica, deep countryside, cockpit country, and I'd wander around the place. In those days, children are free to wander off. And I respected the ancestors in the sense that I love to watch people doing the work they did, whether it's making bamis, cassava bread, or it's making chocolate tea from cocoa you chop down from the tree, or the carpenters, or the people planting yam. As a child, I had this vital interest in whatever was going on around me. And also I was shaped by living in a very extraordinarily beautiful natural world that was very much a part of my daily life. And so all these things have come together. That is respecting the oral culture, the ancestral spirits, what poor people in my society were telling me. And a lot of that was, of course, people of African descent. And now I've come to put the two things together as book learning, which is very important, but also as what I call ground truth, which is a term that is used by land surveyors. So you have a map, but you need to walk the land to establish the boundaries. Or as Zora Neale Hurston said, you gotta go there to know there. And so I think my entire life, the way I live my life, but also the way I write, and how I write, is based on my bringing together those two things. Book learning, which I value, but also using ground truth, that is experience acquired throughout life, to determine what is truth. And I think approaching life on those two terms is more important than ever today, when truth is questioned at every turn. So I think this is why everything that I write, I see as part of a continuum from my childhood to this day.
So there's a world of spirits, there's an ancestral voice, there's this
And the
continuity
natural
of the
world.
child in this natural world.
Yeah.
But you also have this obsession with Columbus.
Yeah, I do.
And you do, it's not a pretty story all the time. And what you do beautifully is not take up Columbus as just this starting point in history, but you disrupt a lot of that. And you understand that birth of the Americas,
Yeah.
the same way you have a Commonwealth consciousness in terms of British Empire, You have an Caribbean and America's consciousness as well.
Yeah.
Not just an Antillean one. So if you could speak to this obsession with Columbus. Unfortunately, people have strange obsessions.
Mine is
Good and
Columbus.
bad. Suspect and serious.
Well, I wish I had a more interesting obsession that I could talk to you about. Or maybe I do, but I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, I've always been, I'm obsessed not so much with Columbus as with that moment in history where the old world met the new world and there was a disruption. People are not aware that in Spain there was a debate about whether the native peoples were human or not. So, you know, I mean, this is deeply embedded in my consciousness and my soul. And right now, I haven't written this book. I'm still continuing this exploration of what it means to be a new world person, a person of the Americas. Because that was, I don't think we recognize what a significant moment that encounter was in history between these worlds. And as my poem Meditation on Yellow, which some of you have read, is trying to deal precisely with that, with the fact that that encounter set in train a division of races. And we are still dealing with whatever was set in train in 1492, in 20, whatever year we're in. And that is what I'm concerned about, the fact that we shouldn't consider history as a linear, something that operates on a linear basis and which is finished. You know, we think of history as the dead past, but it's not. We are living that history today still. And that is my engagement. How is this coming out in terms of who we are, the lives we're living, the decisions we make, and so on? So it's not just about Columbus. This business of knocking down Columbus's statues, I think is crap. I mean, I'm not engaged at that level. I don't care. There's one Columbus statue in Jamaica. If we knock it down, how are we going to remember? You know, so I'm not into that kind of remembering. I'm interested in process. What happened when this took place? And have we dealt with the repercussions of 1492? And I would say no. We're living it today in this moment.
I invite you, Olive, if you could read with us The Pull of Birds, which speaks to some of those themes you were beginning to explore in your contributions.
Okay. I do have a lot of poems dealing with Columbus and the time, you know, the indigenous and that encounter. And The Pull of Birds is a more recent one. I did mark it, but I don't. Oh, I do? But then I can't. I'm sorry. I was trying to find The Pull of Birds, and I was looking in the index on the T. So, oh, it's right here. Yeah, I have it marked. Okay, and this is a recent poem, which, oh no, sorry, it's not. Pull of Birds. This is a poem about Columbus, and it's in the shape of the three ships of Columbus. And we know that Columbus made landfall because he followed the birds migrating. I mean, that's a fact. And so the final stanza is of the birds pulling away from the three ships. I really like to write poems that are shaped, you know, and this is one, The Pull of Birds. Colon, son and grandson of weavers, rejected that calling, but did not neglect craft, keeping 2 sets of books. On his first voyage, landfall receding, where was Japan? He sailed on, praying for a miracle to center him in that unmarked immensity as warp to woof. And suddenly, from the north, a density of birds flying south, their autumn migration intersecting his westward passage. At such an auspicious conjunction, his charts he threw out. The flocks drew him south across the blue fabric of the Atlantic. weary mariners, buoyed by the miracle of land soon, of birds flying across the moon. Birds seeking to outdistance 3 raptors skimming the surface of the sea and sending skyward their doomsday uttering of hawks' bells tinkling endlessly, birds speeding to make landfall at Wanahani. And I should mention this thing of hawks' bells is something that has haunted. Thank you. I've been haunted by the fact that they carried in the holds of the ships gifts, for the native peoples who they expect to be Japanese. And among the gifts were hawks' bells, which are teeny little bells that are attached to birds. Hunting. And so I thought, I've always in my imagination seen these ships speeding along and hearing the tinkling, these little bells tinkling. And also, something I mention in my novel is that when the Taino saw the ships coming in, they thought they were big white birds on the ocean because of the sails, because they didn't use sails, as far as we know. So all of those things came together in that.
Okay, so now we will do this is a quick structure. We're going to have one short segment with Oliver and I talking. Then I will open the floor for questions. Then we'll go back to have a kind of concluding part of our talk, and then we'll have Q&A again. So there are 2 opportunities to contribute and just have the questions at the top of your mind as well, and we could all be succinct to manage the economy of time. Olive, we're going to do something which is a little bit, social media-y. And I'm going to say a word or a phrase. And you're going to give me one sentence. It's just like if I say Amilcar, you could say the love of my life. But anything you want to say. Sanatan, my favorite writer. But you just respond. So the first one is COVID-19.
Don't even have to.
The countryside.
The countryside is the home of my home, spiritually and in every way. Oh, sorry, I can't speak in just one word. You know that.
Olive oil.
I give up. I hate this. I hate this.
3 more. Ackee and saltfish.
My favorite dish, but that's 3 words. Dish.
No problem. And you could have the sentence. Panama.
Yeah. Memory.
Bocas slit fest.
Home. Did I pass? Did I pass the exam?
Well, I had other bacchanal ones, but it's been streamed live. So I want to be respectable to the esteemed colleagues at Bocas Lit Fest and the respectable members of society. So now I would like to open the floor. 1, 2, and you can have 2 more hands maybe, and I'll just structure an order. We'll take 4 contributions. So one my colleague in blue, my colleague here in the shirt, Gerard, and 2 others here, colleague here in the shirt, 1 more. That's 3 men. I like how men lead, but we have 3 women in occupying political leadership in Trinidad now. The president is a woman, the prime minister is a woman, and the opposition is a leader is a woman. So big up Trinidad and Tobago for always advancing things without advancing things, It's nice. It wasn't a feminist subversion, but it was a subversion. So you have to take it as it comes. If you whine in church, at least your waist move. You're alive. Do we have 1 more hand? I have 3. Do I have 1 more contribution before I give it? Thank you for colleague in green. My colleague in blue and the shades, would you like to say something? Can the microphones move? Thank you. Let's wait for the microphone.
Hello. It's a strange moment for me because I'm coming home. I haven't been to Trinidad in 12 years, but I'm a graduate of the equally superior presentation, college. Thank you. Ms. Senior, I'm wondering, as somebody who is so associated with, you're from Jamaica, you're associated with the Caribbean, you live in what I call home, Toronto. So how do you parse identity and belonging for yourself? Mm-hmm. And I'm asking that as a very personally important question. Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you. And I do get that question all the time, and it is important. And it's easy for me to answer because home is in my head. I've lived all over the world, and I don't have a problem moving around geographically because I think I had such a grounding as a child in Jamaica that I live in my head. I live in my space, which is my imaginative space. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter where I am, although I should add, I've now moved back to Jamaica, because I want to be in the physical space, but I occupy a Caribbean space, not just a Jamaican space, but a Caribbean space in my head all the time, no matter where I am. And that, I think, is what keeps me grounded and keeps me alive and able to live in these other places, because I'm a sojourner. I've never felt like I'm an immigrant, which implies that you're going to put down roots and that it's a permanent move or anything like that. So that's how I deal with it, and with questions of identity,
Thank you, Olive, and thank you, colleague Gerard. Microphone here in the first row on your right.
Hello, my name is Gerard Hosier. I just have a question about conformity and curiosity. You brought them both up. Actually, I went to the school about 100 meters from here at Trinity. And when I went there, the headmaster had a handlebar moustache, and we ate watermelon with knife and fork. Think about that. So you're talking about changing the syllabus or challenging or enlivening the syllabus to the Caribbean history. And one of the in the Caribbean, it's very different. Everything has culture, has inertia, and it's very difficult to change from what I learned with watermelon cutting up to today. And I have been in schools, and I am astounded, like you, how it's almost identical. But one of the things, for example, you were talking about Columbus, and there's the romanticization of it, which was challenged, I think, really correctly during BLM with the statue just across the road. And I think that the difficult part is to get teachers on board and get that curiosity, as opposed to the conformity, because it's the conformity that's locking us in the box, and the curiosity of challenging every idea, challenging that statue, challenging the romanticism, challenging, all the different stories, because it's First Nations, it's, slavery, it's emancipation, it's Second World War refugees, it's the existing residents who stayed on, and it's the new immigrants, the Cubans and the Viennese. And they all have a place in a relevant history, because, migration, the pain of migration is a story in itself. Yeah. And all those stories are migration, except for First Nation. And by the way, First Nations still exist. We pretend like they've gone, but the language still exists in South America. It's the same, because what happened, and San Fernando Hill was a religious monument for them, and a pilgrimage, and we forget about that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Olive, if I may, I just laugh at the Venice part, because there's a Trinidadian kind of way that we say Venezuelans.
Oh, Venice.
So they're like Trinidad, Venice. Yeah, so,
Venice.
but I do appreciate that, and we can speak to perhaps the curiosity versus conformity, and We mold minds.
Well, let me say, I'm not an educator, and I'm not really concerned, therefore, with the curriculum as such. What I'm concerned is creating spaces in schools for creativity, for cultural activity, for play. I am shocked at some of the questions that are asked of small children who are forced on their exams. I couldn't answer some of it. And I'm saying, why are we trying to teach things that are unnecessary at a certain age? Why aren't we allowing children to have art and music and dance and find out who they are through creativity, rather than forcing them into a mode where, the only test is passing an exam? I'm not saying that might not be important, So what I'm concerned about is how we approach education in its widest sense, and that includes how parents treat them picnic. I don't know about Trinidad, but there's still this thing where children are not to be seen and not heard and disciplined, and I'm just saying we need to loosen up a bit and recognize that the world of childhood has changed. Our children are now influenced by things that are way beyond the home and the school and everything else. So we need to get on board in enabling the educational system to be part of that process that is shaping them to be worthwhile citizens and worthwhile human beings that are true to themselves, So I'm looking at it in a much wider, in a much wider sense. But I appreciate everything you've said. I think this morning I had a piece of watermelon with a fork, but anyway.
Don't want to mess up your nice clothes.
Exactly.
And your dress. Our colleague here in the midsection.
Hi, morning everybody. I'm visiting from Jamaica, and firstly, a big thank you. I got a grade 1 in CSEC. I did your poem. I still don't know what contemplation on red means, but I got a grade 1. Yeah, we can talk about that after. But I'm on a very interesting literary journey. I moved from having zero interest in reading, just books. I just did it to pass CSEC. And earlier this year, I released my first children's book. So I'm like, okay, I'm reading and I'm getting things done. But I've never been into poetry, ever. I just want to ask you, what is your encouraging words? What exactly does poetry do to an individual when you're reading it, the types of poetry? So that I could probably at the end of this get into poetry, start reading it more?
Wait, hold on a minute. I wish I could give you the part of the speech I gave when I became Poet Laureate of Jamaica. Because I pointed out that, yes, people hate poetry. I'm not read poetry. I'm not know nothing about poetry. We all grew up with poetry. Your first word, yes, mama, yes. Papa, that is poetry. It is rhythm, which is ingrained in us as human beings. And then we move on to nursery rhymes. Right. Didn't you do right? Then we move on to like church hymns, which are a form of, it's poetry set to music. It has rhythm, rhyme, meter. This is how we think. Then you get on to the reggae, and you get on to, are you into music? Sometimes. You're into poetry. So what I'm trying to say is that all of us experience poetry in our everyday lives from the day of birth to the day of death, because when you're dead and buried, they're going to sing poetry at your funeral. So what I feel my mandate, as Poet Laureate, was to say to people, don't be afraid. Don't see that this is something beyond you that's external to your life. Poetry is very much a part of who we are, every single human being. Do you agree? Yes. And
you wake Miss Senior up, man.
And therefore, and therefore, seriously, I think if you started thinking about it that way, and it's about language. Poetry is made up of language. It's the only thing the poet has. It's what we do to it, and it's made up of rhythm and all of those things that are already in our heads, in our bodies, and so on, And so I would encourage you to rethink your attitude It's your attitude that you need to change.
One of the things that, I like with Olive, she was very like, I'm not an educator, I'm not involved with the curriculum, but you see poetry as poet laureate, countryman. But if I am not correct and Instagram proves me right, you all are from the Jamaica Book Festival as well. So big up Jamaica Book Festival as well.
Good.
Yeah.
So you're going to promote poetry then in the next one.
Yes. And if I may, the focus on poetry perhaps, and I know you won't speak into this, perhaps is a shortcoming of what I would have brought here and for the economy of time. But of course, we all know Olive writes non-fiction genre, fiction, poetry, across all genres,
Yeah.
So,
remember, there was one other question.
yes, of course. But just waiting for that.
Sorry.
The third row on your right. Thank you.
Hi. Actually, I only put my hand up because there were 3 men. And I thought in case they were asking dumb questions or whatever, or speaking too much, that I could...
Hot! Real hot!
that I could add a gentle corrective. But actually, I do have a question. And it comes off of what you were just saying about Olive working in so many different discourses. And I wondered if you could say something about which of those discourses, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, short prose, you feel that you swim in best? Like, which is the one that you're most at ease in? And which one perhaps, where are the tensions and possibilities of that? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's someone who has written about my poetry extensively. You know something? I feel comfortable in any of them when I'm in process, because it's not that I think of something as prose and I switch to write it in poetry. It comes to me in the form that it's going to take. And therefore I feel comfortable in whatever I'm doing. Which is not to say I don't have a lot of unfinished. I don't have a lot of stuff which I've started and not finished. But I don't really choose one over the other. Ideas come to me, and it's a book. And a lot of my ideas have been in my system for many, many, many years. Like my book on Panama, it's called, what's it called? Thank you. It's called Dying to Better Themselves, West Indian Builders of the Panama Canal. It's a huge, huge, huge book, and I not only researched and wrote it, I chose the pictures. I had a lot to do with that production. It's probably the biggest book I've done in terms of size, but that germ of that book was in me from my childhood, because I grew up with people who had gone to Panama. And so I write out of, I keep saying it's how pearls are formed. There's a sand grain that just becomes an itch and forms. You have to get rid of it eventually, and that's how I wrote my tiny book. Everything I do has a long gestation period. It's very rare for me to just pick up and write something. I hardly do that. And so the thing itself, the idea, takes its own form and its own shape. I mean, long before I wrote my Panama book, I wrote some poems about it. About my grandfather and so on. And so everything I write it's as if it chooses its own shape. So I've written a lot of poems about the indigenous because I've been doing that kind of research over many, many, many years. But it's taking a long time for me to get to write the big thing, which is the novel. But I'm totally happy. The only thing I must tell you, I'm a failure as a writer. I did try writing a play, and it was roundly condemned. Or let's say my friends who are playwrights and theater people were not very complimentary about it. But it's about something I do want to write about. I've put it aside, and I'm gonna try again with it. But I'm not a playwright, though I've written radio plays. But yeah, it just comes naturally to me, whatever I do.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for the contributions on the floor. We will have like another session with us having a dialogue, and then we'll take 4 contributions again before we close. Is that fine? Solidaridad. So let's work now. I actually like that last comment. How have you thought of failures as a writer and even respond to them over time?
Well, I'm not sure. The thing is, I don't put anything out there until I'm 100% certain that this is the best that I can do. And I think all my books have been well received, in terms of criticism, book reviews, and so on. I don't know that I've really ever had any bad negative response, or maybe I just pretend that they don't exist. So I don't think about failure and success in those terms, really and truly. I don't think about failure. I will attempt things and then I will give up because I'm not ready for them, or it is not ready for me. But it doesn't mean that I have failed at it. And also, I'm very good at strategizing, because I don't attempt things that I feel I'm going to fail at. I'm not one of those people who feel I can do everything in the world. You know what I mean? So I only tackle things that I feel that I can be confident about. And it doesn't always work. I'm not saying everything I do is successful or I complete it or what. But I'm pretty limited in what I do, in what I choose to take on, what I choose to tackle. Because I feel you need to be passionate about everything you do. And if you're not passionate, forget it. And I've been asked to do things that I'm not passionate about, that would maybe pay me a lot of money, and I don't do it. So I'm very selective about how I spend my time, which is very important to me. I'm put on this earth to spend my time wisely or productively, and that's how I operate.
But you're very strategic, but you think about growth. You have cultivated a certain relationship with social media.
Yeah.
And created a very interesting interplay between readers and Twitter or ex-citizens reading your poetry, particularly during the pandemic. You could speak about what drove you to that approach?
Yeah, because readers are very important to me. I mean, the best thing that that happens to me is if I meet somebody who says, I read this and I loved it, or I became a writer because I read one of your things. That is the most beautiful thing anybody can say to me. And of course, as writers, we're solitary. I spend a lot of my time by myself. And so this kind of experience here with an audience, with people who know my work, is very, very important. And therefore, when social media came on, I realized that, one has to engage. And I wrote this during the pandemic. Of course, I was shut up. I was in Toronto at the time, and they were very strict about what you could do. And it was a shocking event to me, as it was to everybody. And I ended up collecting the language of the pandemic that, was being thrown at us. Like, I can't remember any of it now. It's all in the poems. But social distancing, and all of that. You're masking. Hands are important. You had to wash your hands and so on. And I started writing down these words because it was a whole new lexicon out there. And I ended up with hundreds of words. And I thought, what am I going to do with it? And then I started writing poems. And then I said, what am I going to do with this poem I'm writing? I'm here by myself. And I started sending them out on social media. And really and truly, it amazed me that people would respond instantly from around the world. And it was suddenly I was back in that moment where poetry began, which is people in the cave, and the hunter coming home with whatever, and everybody dancing, celebrating, somebody making up language, words to go with it. But it was tribal. Poetry is the earliest art form, probably. And it was the work of a group of people. And it is about sharing. And suddenly the pandemic and social media have given us the opportunity again to engage with each other through words, through language, through poetry, and so on. So I found it a really sort of liberating experience, you know.
The reason I'm asking these questions is to think about your writing practice contemporaneously. You know, sometimes we look at writers and think about their biography, or we analyze what their work produces and how it resonates. You were also Poet Laureate, which is a program, and different Caribbean countries have tried to take it up. It's iterative, quite difficult to fund, and even the poets who are selected might be constrained by not having a kind of have a well-resourced or sustainably resourced program. But I do know, as Poet Laureate, you had a very public-facing vision for what poetry could be, where you were recognizing poetry in everyday life. Could you speak to your time as a Poet Laureate, but that idea of poetry, recognizing poetry in the lives of everyday Jamaicans?
Yeah, well, I tried. I'm not sure I succeeded entirely. But becoming Poet Laureate really awakened me to the importance of poetry. And I started thinking about poetry differently. And I started thinking of ways in which I could convince people like that gentleman there about, about the importance of poetry and the role it plays in our lives. Because what poetry does, I think, is that it gives us a different perspective on everything. That is it. The poetry is enabling you to see whatever it is in a different light. That is the role of the poet. That's what the poet does. And so I tried. I mean, I didn't succeed in a lot of the things I wanted to do because, as you say, there are limitations in terms of resources. But I did. One of the things I did was to establish a poetry archive where poets read their work and you can see them and hear them and so on. And that's an ongoing project, I think, I hope. And the other thing I brought, I don't have it here, but I also, as Poet Laureate, I had to do a book. All of us have had to do books. And I have done a coffee table book on trees. It's called Tree Scene, and it's a combination of poems that I selected by Jamaicans. Poems are just little bits of poems, a beautiful two of twisted trees, and photographs of trees put together as my way of saying to people, a tree is not just a thing standing there, and in the case of many people, in your way, so you're going to cut it down. A tree is a part of life itself. And in my introduction, my first words are that thank a tree for every breath you take. And the whole idea of this book, and I have one copy, it's not out, I have just one copy sent to me at great cost in Toronto. It's on the high seas coming to Jamaica. But if anybody wants to see it, I do have a copy with me. And that is, I succeeded in doing that. But there are a lot of other things I wanted to do that I couldn't do because of, constraints and what people are interested in and so on. But anyway, I've rambled on.
No, you're not, because but this is life work. It is connected to the work you did interviewing, being in the places of working class women from different ranges and walks of life in Jamaica, seeing the miracles that they performed in everyday life. If you could speak to that project, you have this very research-oriented and grounded way you do work, and it's not just poetry, but you extract and value the poetry in people's lives.
Yeah. Do you mean my book, Working Miracles?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, that book, which is one of my earliest nonfiction works, was actually the only work that was commissioned because I didn't do the actual research. There was a project called Women in the Caribbean Project, which is a very extensive research project, well, as the title says. And a lot of scholars wrote and published books arising from that research. I was asked, as a poet, a creative writer, to take that material and translate it into a way for the ordinary reader, somebody who is not an academic. And so that is where that project started. It's called Working Miracles. But what I found is there were gaps in the research. And so I also went and looked at other bits and pieces of information. And it's dealing with the Caribbean women from women in all aspects, you know, family life, education, etc., etc. So that was a very significant piece of work, not just my work, but the entire project. But yeah, I'm interested. This comes out of my curiosity as well. I'm interested in the origins of things. If you point out a tree to me there, I want to know the name of the tree. I can't give up. I can't sleep at night unless I know the name of the tree. I'm like that, you know, so it's very boring for other people to be with me. But, you know, I'm just saying that I want to go to the origins of everything. So I want to know about the women I grew up with. That book, research, taught me a lot about the life that I witnessed being lived by my mother and other women, for example. But scholarship enabled me to take that much further. Same with Panama. I grew up with people who had gone to Panama. I had no idea what they did there, but I felt I had to find out. Same with the indigenous people. I had to find out, how could they vanish? So everything that I do comes out of my personal desire to know. So I'm a fast. When I say a fast, that's what I mean, you know. Not fast as, you know, fast used to be a term applied to girls who were sexually precocious. I don't mean it that way.
I just love that you said sexually precocious.
Necessarily. Just girls. No, it's true. A fast woman, you know, she dressed a certain way and behaved a certain way.
No, they're just loose.
She loose. No, them just yeah.
But I understand you fast.
But me fast, F-A-A-S, in the Jamaican sense of being curious about things. That's the basis of my life, how I lived, how I write, everything I do. I'm curious, I want to know.
Yeah.
So.
I would make a humble proposal, a modest proposal to Nicholas and Shivani, and we should get fast and in place. Because we say fast and out of place. Olive has been fast and in place.
And in place.
Whenever we talk with you.
And in place. Yeah.
One of the things that I want to go to conclude the reasoning circle or line we have created here. And every time I go to Jamaica, honestly, it's a very spiritual experience for me when I go to Jamaica. I never appreciate development in Trinidad more than when I drive in Jamaica. I have the humility and respect I have for Trinbagonians when I come home. All the cuss and bad drive I imagined. I didn't know you had to drive through the pothole to get to the road.
And on the sidewalk.
Exactly. So Jamaica, there's a philosophy of roads that I am grappling with. And a material sense, a corporeal sense, an intellectual one. So, but I saw you read in Jamaica at the National Art Gallery recently. Yeah. And you were speaking about the endeavor to build roads and highways and so on. Could you read for us Dead Straight, your poem? That was an interesting setup, eh?
Well, I just
road tourism.
Going back to Jamaica, I took a decision that I was not going to drive. Although I love driving, and when I lived in Jamaica, I drove I know every road in Jamaica. Now I'm afraid to even be driven. It's so bad. So I agree with you. Not to mention the potholes and everything. Anyway, but my dears, we do have highways all over the place, and so I wrote this poem called Dead Straight, where I'm not against modernity, but modernity comes at a price, and the price, my vision of Jamaica is driving along the coast, wandering along, seeing the little coves, the sea, the beauty, and just chilling. Anyway, I'll read the poem. Here, you heard. And it's one of my recent poems, actually. It's in my collected poems, Hurricane Watch. It's not in anything else. Dead Straight, okay. Need my glasses. Dead Straight. I'm traveling back home to you, but it's an omen. My road maps creased and torn along dead straight lines. The hill and gully ride is over now, and I'm flat out on the dead straight highway with a toll. Not a glimmer of the coastline as I try to make it home to you through a forest of hotels as thick as thieves. For the sea, the coves and beaches, once seen through seaside shacks and palm trees, have been sold, and the rest of us are herded to the verge by this new highway, while over there our beauty is extolled, bottled and sold and gated. In this new paradise, the only palms are greased, and somebody's beach umbrella has replaced the shade tree we once sat under, and the towns and settlements smolder as they're bypassed. I can no longer witness on this highway with a toll that makes us seem as modern as elsewhere, for elsewhere is not where I'm meant to be. And a dead straight highway leaves no scent, no monument to the past, no scenic beauty for the curvature of my eye to take in, and endless empty space is not inviting. But perhaps there's no social meaning to this tirade after all. I'm just feeling lost without a map as I make it home to you and pay the toll. You could see it simply as a love song, to the curving of your cheekbones, to the mountains of your thighs, the hill and gully passion of your eyes, and your hair that is not dead straight, but very much otherwise.
A round of 4 questions before we close. Un, deux, trois. One more. Thank you, that's 4 we have here. Let's go to my colleague from Guyana, spoken word poet here. That's in the 3rd row on your left.
Hey, morning. My question is about poetry. What should drive the poet, or what should take preeminence, be it poetry just in terms of writing or expressive like a spoken word poet? Should it be what inspires you, or should you be considerate of the consumers, or have your pulse on society? What should take preeminence in terms of your inspiration and drive? Is it what I feel like writing and who gets it, or what is needed at the time?
Yeah, that's hard to answer. I would say the important thing is, first of all, to decide what kind of poet you are and what kind of poetry do you want to write, because there's poetry and poetry. You know what I mean? There is the kind of poetry that is academics are going to interrogate. There's spoken word. There's a poetry from the heart that will end up on a card. You know, what do you call those cards? Birthday card or something. In other words, I take a very democratic view of what poetry is. Poetry is not one thing. Poetry is any form of expression that uses language and use the tools such as whether it's rhyme or rhythm, all of that has to be part of the process. What you do with it is who you are and who you want to be, what you want to be. If you want to be somebody who's going to write books that are going to be reviewed and so on, you're a certain type of poem. If you want to be a spoken word poet, you write a different type of poem that appeals to the audience. And do you agree with me, young? Right. So it's not for me or you or anyone to say what poetry is or what it should be. If you want to write or be a poet, then it's for you to decide who your audience is. What kind of response do you want? What kind of return or expectation do you want from what you're doing? And there are some spoken word poets who are also successful, where the language they use is also successful in print. Not all of it is. And I also want to say that there is a type of poetry that's about you and just an expression of your emotion, which is fine. But I would then personally question that and say, I know that you're not telling me anything about love or all the things we've been through. What I need is a twist to it. I want something more than just a statement of emotions. You know what I mean? But at the same time, poetry also serves a lot of purpose for the individuals. So there are a lot of individuals who use poetry just to express feelings of the moment and never go beyond that. And that's fine. As I say, I'm perfectly fine as long as you know what it is you're doing, and you're not doing one thing and think you're doing something else, you know. And I think everybody can write poetry because it is such a sublime form of self-expression. It's therapy. I keep saying I didn't end up in Bellevue Hospital because I'm a writer. And you know what I mean? In my early years, I used poetry and my short stories as a form of therapy, really and truly, to work out. I wasn't writing autobiographically, but I was using writing to come to terms with my feelings as a young person growing up and all the issues I had and so on. So poetry also serves that purpose, no matter what age you are in life. So thanks for that question. It's a very lengthy answer.
It's fine, and thank you for the explanation. Young Alan Agostini, right? Big up.
Good morning, everyone. I wrote down my question, so I didn't forget it. 1 second. Okay. So, thank you for this conversation. Reading can be a source for inspiration for writers. Is this true for you?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? You're reading it, and it's hard. I can't see you because of the light. Okay.
Is that better? No. Okay. Reading can be a source of inspiration for writers. Is this true for you?
What is? Sorry, I'm sorry.
Reading can be a source of
reading. Okay, thank you.
Of inspiration for writers. Is this true for you? What are you reading right now? Are there books that you return to? Basically, I'm trying to get your reading list. I want to know what you're reading, what you've been reading, what is staying in your hearts. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I always appreciate questions about reading because if you tell me you want to write, the first question to you is, what do you read? If you don't read, you can't be a writer. I have learned, I have never been to writing school. Everything I know about writing, I learned from reading. And there's reading and reading. You read and then you learn to read critically. You read for entertainment. Right now, I'm at that stage in life. You want to know what I'm reading? Detective fiction. Because it goes in, I can't even remember the titles when I'm done. I'm reading purely as entertainment. I've done all the reading for education. I'm just at that. I'm just saying. No, but seriously, all my life I have learned from reading. And reading, I wasn't even conscious of reading critically, although I guess I've studied literature at various times. But that is how you learn to write. We're part of a tradition and learn. And I will also say that even if you're not a writer, literacy is so important to every single human being that, just learning to read and write. And it's very sad now that, the literacy rate in countries like Jamaica has become so low. Have I answered your question? You had a lot of questions.
What books do you return to?
What books do you return to?
Oh, I return to, okay. Books that I hated to read in high school. In high school, and this is why I'm worried about people reading my work. But in high school, we had this classic English education. So we had to do a Shakespeare play, a 3-act Shakespeare play. We had to do, like Charles Dickens, we had to do Wordsworth, people like that. I hated Charles Dickens, and I realized they chose the most uninteresting Dickens books, like Hard Times and A Tale of Two Cities, and blah, blah, blah. I hated Dickens. And until much later, I went to live in London. I was in South London, which is Dickens territory. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing names that seemed familiar to me. Because reading Dickens in high school in the Caribbean or Shakespeare, we have no context for reading any of that. Anyway, I became a believer. And I have read every single Dickens book with great pleasure, and I keep going back to my favorites time and time again. So I'm a big fan of some of the classic works like that. What really turned me on as an adult writer was Latin American literature. When I read 100 Years of Solitude, I thought, I don't have to write another word, I've been there. And I've been very much influenced by Latin American literature, including Jorge Amado, and so on. And I go back to some of that work. There are things I go back to, but not in any systematic way. And half the time I can't remember what I did yesterday, so it's no point really asking me. But as I say, right now I'm just reading stuff that just to pass the time. I'm not reading anything that's really serious right now. I do read a lot of poetry still.
Thank you very much. We're going to have 2 more contributions. The third person identified, we are going to close in 6 minutes. That is from Jamaica Book Festival again, and then Lindsay as well. All hear the time. Let me do the thing. Yeah. The microphone is on its way. Sorry about that.
Hello, good morning again. Hi, Olive.
Hi. Light is bad.
So, before I ask my question, I just wanted to say that, there's currency of connection in honesty, like talking about what we feel and experience when it comes to literature. And that point about poetry, and so Joel and I are a decade apart. It's very valid because what we found is like one extreme or the other. So JBF runs a Young Writers Prize, brand new. Mm-hmm. And when we put out the categories, the call for submissions, a lot of the poetry that we got, you could see that it was the lowest number of entries in terms of the categories. Mm-hmm. And what we received almost followed like a formula. Mm-hmm. Like, so it then tells you some of the discussions you're having about what poetry is. Yes. There is a disconnect between the younger generation and their understanding and spaces that allow them to honestly say, I don't like this, and then for somebody to introduce the whole world, of it to say, this is what poetry can be. It can be walking out in a forest and seeing something and it moves you, and it could be 2 words or 3 words, or it could be something much more elaborate, like I experienced at the first Citizens Poetry Slam last year, which was incredible. So just to say that, but you made a point earlier, which I found very profound, about the encounter of the indigenous with Columbus, and the fact that we haven't really treated with it. Where do you think we are with that process that you mentioned?
If I may, Olive, we will just take one more question and then you will respond to both. And thank you very much. Okay, no problem. Thanks. Our colleague Lindsay Corrindon, out of West Indian here, he would make his final contribution.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. I have a question about the creative process for you, Olive. So you've had a sustained... Yeah.
Can you...
All right, I'll stand.
Sorry, the lighting makes it hard for me to hear.
So you've had a pretty sustained and prolific writing career. And I'm curious about your writing process over the years. Like, looking back on your trajectory, what would you say are some of the ways in which your creative process has developed, changed, declined over the years?
So, and we will leave with that message around that thinking through the encounter and your work, and then your creative writing process over the span of your life.
Okay, you'll have to remind me what I'm supposed to do. Okay, thanks for that. I will just say in response to poetry and the kids coming up and, writing formulaic and so on, that poetry is a craft that can be taught. I think writers of poetry can do with some teaching. And I teach poetry, or I used to. And one of the things I found was using examples, to talk about poetry. Why did this writer do this? Maybe you can imitate. Derek Walcott, like all major writers, has said, I learned to write poetry by imitation, which is not the same as plagiarism. So there's that point. What was Lynn's?
Well, that was about the writing process, so the indigenous encounter with Columbus.
Yeah, and what was the question again? I've forgotten. Right, yes, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think, and I've been living mainly in Canada, where if you lived in Canada today, you would see the process operating, because the Indigenous people of Canada have so come to the fore. I mean, I went to university in Canada a long, long time ago, and I was appalled at how people look down on the natives, you know? And now the Indigenous people of Canada have reasserted themselves as a force, not just politically, but they're in all the creative spaces. Some of the top writers now are Indigenous, the artists and so on. I think this is happening all over the Americas, where the force has to come from Indigenous people themselves. And we in the Caribbean have always pretended that history begins in Jamaica anyway, in the British Islands in 1655, when the British arrived. You know, and we have dealt with the African heritage, people like Kamau Brathwaite and so on, from the 60s onwards, independence, have talked about the African element. We were force-fed the European element in school. Nowadays, I notice the people of ethnic backgrounds are now bringing into the discourse their own experience, the Chinese, East Indians, people from, Northern Africa, Asians, Arabs, and so on. And I think the moment now is for Indigenous people to step into that space and say, we are here. We were here before everybody else. Let's talk about this. We have not had this discussion in the Caribbean about the Indigenes and their place in our history. And it doesn't matter now, we're finding out from DNA that in some of the Spanish-speaking islands, over 60% of people have the maternal Taino DNA line in their blood, which makes perfect sense. In Jamaica, people are beginning to recognize this. So to me, it's not a question of blood, whether we're all descended from Carib or whatever, Arawaks or thing. It's how it has played out in our culture. Because so many things we do in our culture are indigenous, or it's a fusion of African and indigenous, especially religion, how things play out in religion, in the spirit world, in all of that. So I feel that people need to take responsibility for bringing into the discourse all the elements that make us who we are as Caribbean people. We're not one set of people or another. So I think the moment is now for the indigenous, for us to recognize the indigenous part of our heritage and how that has influenced, what bearing that has on who we are today. Because I think it's part of who we all are, you know? So.
Most definitely. Hands up. And definitely, sorry, Olive, you had something?
No.
It was just to recognize that there are so many literary cultures, because in Belize, indigenous people are very present.
That's right.
In Guyana they are very present.
So.
In Suriname.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Trinidad.
It's as if they are political cultures responding how it constructed that literary culture. Around Indianness, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago is very relevant to Martinique, and we think through that. Olive, to be honest with you, I could do the whole gossip thing and say the truth. You are a major writer. You are the ideal for many writers, and I have 10 to 20 friends who wish they were in this seat to have the opportunity to ask you the question. So for me, this is a life goal achieved. I never imagined I would have been next to you. So thank you for sharing your work, and I want to thank everyone for giving that dialogue and vision with the work. Somebody pointing to what?
That was the last question.
It had a last question?
Yeah.
She answered that first?
No.
But she didn't answer that first?
Oh.
Well, you're not listening. Can you
Lindsay,
answer?
Lindsay.
Big up Lindsay. Lindsay, my friend.
What Lindsay
Yeah,
said.
yeah, big up Lindsay. Lindsay, the creative writing process over time. But the Bocas organizers watching me in my eye.
Yes. So
And I answer to them and So, Lindsay, we go have that reasoning. Olive is available for the book signing. Sorry for laying you down, doggy. But it's love. Love in the house. Love in the house. Love in the house. Thank you very much.